The wind howled as the grey sea crashed against the jagged rocks below the cliffs. Salt hung heavy in the air, and the cries of distant gulls echoed like warnings. The old lighthouse stood tall and defiant against the storm rolling in from the east, its wittered stones damp from spray and ash. Waves pounded the shoreline with growling fury, but inside the tower, all was still. Elias Monroe moved slowly up the spiral staircase, each creaking step beneath his boots a reminder of the decades he had spent within the lighthouse walls. He carried an old lantern, its flickering flame casting long shadows that danced across the crumbling walls. He sneezed, and his blood came slower than it once had, but routine guided him more than strength. It was the same route he had taken every evening for nearly 40 years, ever since his father passed the watch to him. Tonight felt different. At the top, Elias stepped into the lantern room. The thick glass windows were streaked with rain, and lightning flashed across the sky in fractured veins. He placed the lantern down beside the great light and moved to the brass levers and gears. He responded stiffly to his touch. With practiced care, he wound the ancient mechanism that powered the rotation of the beacon. The gears groaned, then clicked into motion. The great light began its slow sweep across the Black Sea, cutting a pale arc through the storm like a watchful eye. Elias stood quietly, staring out through the rain-smeared glass. In the distance, nothing but black water churned. But he knew these waters. Beneath the surface lay jagged trees and hidden shoals that had claimed dozens of ships long before the lighthouse was built. The light was a promise, a warning, a lifeline. And he was its last keeper. Behind him, a soft thump echoed on the stairs. He turned, but saw nothing. Only the flickering glow of his lantern on the stairs below. He frowned. The tower was old, it creaked and groaned in the wind. Still, that sound hadn't been the wind. It had been deliberate. "Haman," he called out, voice hoarse with disuse. "Wostor, silence." The hairs on his arms prickled. He hadn't had a visitor in months. Supplies were dropped at the dock on a season. No one ever come up unless summoned, and he had sent no message. He stepped toward the staircase and peered down. Nothing but darknesses. Another thump. Closer this time, a few steps below. He grabbed the lantern and held it high, casting its trembling light down the spiraling stairs. A shadow moved, quick, like a flicker in the corner of an eye. "Wostor," he called again, louder now. Still nothing. He backed into the lantern room, closed the iron hatch behind him, and secured it with the old latch. He stood in the middle of the room, heart pounding in his chest like a drum. The beacon turned steadily, lighting the room with pulses of harsh white light every few seconds. Another thump, right outside the hatch now. He reached for the old flare gun mounted near the window. It hadn't been fired in years. His hand trembled as he held it. You knew either to aim or to wait. Then a voice, muffled through the hatch. "Elias," he froze. The voice was low, almost familiar, but distorted, like it came through water or a dream. He hadn't heard his name spoken like that in decades. The storm raged on, and the sea below swallowed the light. Elias didn't move for a long time. The voice lingered in the stillness like fog, seeping into the corners of the room. The storm outside raged harder now. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rolled so close it seemed to shake the glass. But all Elias could hear was that voice, soft and slow, calling his name like a memory. He took a step closer to the hatch. The flare gun was still in his hand, though he barely registered the weight. His fingers twitched against the trigger. Again, the voice came. "Elias, it is time." His blood caught. Time. Time for what? He hadn't spoken to anyone in months. He hadn't seen another soul since the last supply boat disappeared into the fog. But there was something in the voice, something that scratched at the edges of his thoughts. "Familiar, wrong," he shouted over the wind. "Who are you? Say it plain." No answer, just the groaning of the tower in the wind and the steady sweep of the beacon behind him. He waited, heart thudding in his ears. Then, from the floor, softly at first, then clearer, came a drip. A wet, rhythmic sound. Drip, 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 Elias turned, slowly. Water was pooling near the edge of the lantern room floor, seeping in from somewhere. He looked up. The ceiling was dry. He looked to the walls, intact. But the water kept spreading, curling like fingers across the stone. He crouched, touched it. Cold, thick, not sea water. He brought it close to his nose. Metallic, coppery, blood. He staggered back, his knees nearly giving out. The flare gun clattered to the floor. He gripped the wall, breathing hard, staring at the slowly growing puddle. A sound behind him made him spin. The hatch handle. It was turning. He longed for the gun, grabbed it just as the latch clicked open. The hatch clicked inward, wind rushing in with arrow. The stairs were dark, empty, 10 footstep, slow, wet. Something was climbing. Elias raised the flare gun, arms shaking. Don't come any closer, he barked. A shape emerged in the stairwell. At first it looked like a man. Tall, pale, but it didn't move like a man. It flowed, like smoke trapped in flesh. Its face came into view, and Elias froze. It was his father, but not as he remembered him. The figure wore his father's coat, the one he had been buried in, but the face was wrong. Sleek, grey, eyes black as oil, and smiling. Elias backed up until he hit the wall, the gun trained on the thing. "You're not him," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The figure stepped into the light of the beacon, and for an instant, Elias saw something else beneath the skin, something writing. "Endless, ancient, we kept the light," it said in his father's voice. "Now it is yours to drive back." Elias pulled the trigger. The flare burst out in a blinding scream of red light, filling the room, catching the figure in the chest. It staggered, shrieking in a voice that peeled the paint from the walls. Smoke poured from its body, and the light from the flare seemed to tear it apart. It fell backward down the stairs. Elias slammed the hatch shut, locked it, then collapsed beside the great light. He lay there, heart hammering, breath ragged. The beacon turned. The storm outside began to fade. But from far below, in the dark, something began climbing again. And this time, it was not alone.